podem se dirigir a qualquer uma delas. O Wi-Fi é de graça, você pode usar o celular normal, só usa em modo silencioso, e também está liberado filmar, fotografar, postar, só usa a hashtag BigFestival2018, vamos fazer essa hashtag subir aí no Twitter. E sem mais delongas, eu já vou apresentar aqui o pessoal que vai fazer essa palestra, que é bem aguardada, pois vai ser sobre o mercado chinês. Então vamos lá. Quem deseja explorar o mercado chinês não pode perder aqui agora, porque a partir de agora, experientes especialistas vão falar sobre a entrada nesse mercado. Eles vão dar conselhos também sobre como apresentar melhor seus projetos aos editores chineses. Então, vou chamar aqui para sentar ao palco do Big Festival 2018, Matthew Leopold, da Yodo One Games, palmas para ele. Também vou chamar Shinyu Michael Young, da Oasis Game. O George Tudor Florea, o Ted, da Nordic Games. O Montgomery Singman, da iDream Sky Technology. E o Everett Wallace, da Mob. Mas acho que não veio os outros dois, são só vocês três. They're only you guys, right? Ok. Então são só os três. Os outros não apareceram aqui. Boa sorte.
Hello, good afternoon.
Só um aviso. Quem quiser tradução simultânea pode pegar ali à esquerda da sala. Então, para poder entender melhor aqui os palestrantes. Thank you. Obrigado.
Muito obrigado. And hello, Brazil. I'm so happy to be here for the first time in your country. It's only my second day, so I'm a little bit jet-lagged, but I feel the energy already. I feel that everything is building towards your game at 3, right? Because my panel got delayed because of that game. So I love your football culture. Thanks again to the organizers of Abra Games and the big festival. I think you're doing an amazing job. Thanks for having us here. This festival has been heard all around the world, from Nordic Game to GDC to even soon in China Joy. I think the ladies are doing a fantastic job, so I'd like to you guys to applaud them for their work for this festival here. I also have to give you a quick football result, because I just looked on my phone, and it seems that Sweden may play Brazil in the next round, because Sweden beat Mexico 3-0 and Germany didn't win. They lost, so they're out. So that's a surprise. So I'm going to have a big smile on my face for the whole panel now. To quickly introduce myself, I'm Teddy Florea. I'm the organizer of the Nordic Game Conference. How many of you know the Nordic Game show? I've heard about it. Okay. Of course, you too. So basically, Nordic Game, just to give a quick intro, it's one of the most known festivals in Europe. It's a festival that focuses on a lot of business, investments, publishing deals, also on a lot of original speakers like Hideo Kojima, who came 2 years ago to our show. And it's about kind of building a bond of lots of closeness into the gaming industry with a global feel. So that happens every year in May, and I hope to have a Brazilian delegation with guaranteed access to publishers next year, and I'm going to work with this with Abra Games and the other communities in Brazil. So today we're going to discuss a quite enigmatic market, which is so huge that it's surprising that it's still enigmatic. So we're going to talk about China, and just to give you a quick few figures about the Chinese market. So in 2017, the Chinese games market was at $27 billion, and it's expected to grow on domestic revenues by 2021 to $35 billion. Also, China alone accounts for more than 1/4 of all global game revenues, reaching $37.9 billion in 2017. It will naturally remain the #1 on the market, so I think it's important to decipher it and to understand what goes behind, who are the main actors, what are the main attributes from both a macro and micro perspective. Today we're going to discuss the evolution of the market. We're going to give you the general trends there. We're going to also focus on the current main stakeholders in China in terms of the stores that exist there, the main companies. Also, we're going to focus on the strategies that we should take towards penetrating that market. What could a Western company do to be successful in China? Who they should work with? And I promise it's not going to be only self-branding for their companies. We're going to discuss in general what are the trends and methods that work and don't. So having said this, we'll also have questions from the floor at the end for 10 minutes. So if you have any ideas, please tell us, and the panelists will answer. And now I'd like to introduce them. So maybe if you want to say a few words about yourselves, like what is your position in the company, what does the company do globally at the moment, and what's your objective in Brazil and generally and other events?
Oh, sorry. Okay. Hi guys. My name is Matt Leopold. I work for Yoda One Games. I head up the BD and marketing team. And our team is primarily based in Beijing. I'm the only one working remotely right now from New York. I lived in China for a little over 6 years and recently moved back. Yoda One, we are a global games publisher. We published a couple of small indie hits that have gone very viral in the West. We are definitely more specialized in China, however. We publish both mobile and PC games in China. And what am I looking for here? I'm looking to meet some awesome new teams that maybe we haven't been in touch with in the past. Looking for some new content and also to educate people on the China market when I can.
Thank you. Michael?
Yeah, hello guys. I'm Michael Yang from Oasis Games. I do business development for Oasis Games, and we are a cross-platform game publisher based in Beijing. We basically do all the platform for game publishing, web, mobile, PC, and console. For web and mobile, we dedicate in publishing Chinese games outside China into different territories. And for PC and console, we are very similar to other Western publishers. We can do global deal on all the PC and console platforms and also work on regional deals as well. So I'm here to look for new PC and console premium titles for our portfolio and also exchange some thoughts with Latin America developers to to get them know more about China, also learn more about the market here. Thanks.
So I'll start with a simple and very open question. Why China? Why would a Western company go to the unknown in your region?
I mean, I think the easiest thing is that the numbers really speak for themselves, and if you really can get into the China market, you'll find it's well worth it. It surprises a lot of developers how much revenue and how many downloads they can see from the China market alone. To give you an example, one of our games that we've launched about five and a half years ago, it's right now about 400 million, 450 million total downloads in China alone. Makes up about 99% of that player base, and the original developers had no idea that it was going to go so viral in China, and that was a very casual game. It's called Ski Safari, and to this day, it's still growing in numbers. So I mean, if you can get your game in China, it's well worth it. But again, it's a very competitive market, so not every title is really fit for it.
Yeah, I guess it's just like Matt just said, the market is big enough for everybody to, although it's dominated by, for example, Tencent or NetEase, it's still got a big, the whole market is big enough for all kinds of games. So I guess it's a very interesting place to explore especially for Western developer or publishers.
Thanks. And we're going to discuss the limitations and a lot of other regulations that happen in China, so because there's lots of variables involved before you can actually go there and be successful. So let's make a quick dissection now of the most successful games that exist in China at the moment, or over the past 5 years, for example. What do they have in common? What are the main characteristics of a successful game in China? And what do audiences in China look for when they enjoy a game?
Yeah, I guess for the biggest game market in China is definitely mobile, and which is everybody interested in learning about. And if you look at the top charts, all the game that makes great revenue are, say, most of them are RPG games. It can be MMORPG or turn-based or like card RPG. So all the game is, they have good graphics and also gameplay that has proved successful in the past, and they all have a very a great design in progression. So for good graphic, it's just attracts players by first look, and for solid gameplay, it's easy to pick up and also fun to play with. And more importantly, the progression design is gives players more to keep them in the game and play for long-term satisfaction, and also to have more opportunity for them to spend money and to speed up their progression.
Yeah, and I'd add to that, China's not afraid of pay to win. It's very much a supporter of that mechanic. And I mean, to add to what Michael is saying with the graphics, I mean, what we've found is that when they're a lot more splashy action, like very in-your-face type graphics, those do very well in China. We've modified some games to add more of that to the art style. And as Michael was also saying, I mean, most games in the top charts over the past few years have been all online. Online is a big thing in China, but again, I mean, with recent changes to the Android side, we've been seeing a lot more casual games make it into the space a lot more successfully than they were previously.
Thank you. And now let's focus a bit on the mobile game side. So could you pinpoint the main local mobile game platforms and stores that exist in China at the moment?
It's a tough question because there are about 200 Android app stores to really look at. Obviously, certain stores drive a lot more traffic, and when we do a launch in China, we'll typically do a phased launch with the Android app stores where we'll first launch on iOS, then we'll launch on 25, 30 Android app stores. Then after we get metrics, we'll tweak the game a bit, then we'll launch on another 30, 40 app stores up until maybe 6 months out, we'll hit about 150 to 200 Android app stores. But again, you only really need to get your game onto 25, 30 app stores to really drive most of that traffic. I mean, specifics, I mean, most of the carriers have, I mean, all the carriers have their own channels. A lot of the big name companies that you probably have heard in the West are also big on the Android side. I don't know do you want to go into specifics or like, the different handset manufacturers are also pretty big. Oppo, Huawei, Xiaomi, Vivo is pretty big.
Yeah. I think the biggest is definitely WeChat from
WeChat's
Tencent. So, but on WeChat, most of the games are, Tencent's first-party game. And for a few of third-party games, Tencent has very high standard for the game quality and target users, and so it's very hard for any developer to be published by Tencent in China. So that's why we take a look at all other big Android stores.
Yep, and like Tencent obviously has WeChat. They also have their own platform as well. It's separate from that. And I mean, being third-party publishers, it's very easy to get onto that channel rather than the WeChat channel. And so that actually drives a lot of traffic as well. And yeah, I mean, yeah, I guess he covered everything else.
How many of you know about WeChat?
Ooh, get on WeChat, guys. It is the best chat platform out there, bar none. I mean, I've been using WhatsApp at this conference a lot, and it is so difficult to use. And I mean, living in China, everything is run on WeChat. I mean, you pay your phone bill, you pay your railroad tickets, you transfer money. Literally, your life is run on WeChat. So if you're not on it, get on it just so you can experience it. Now they also have opened it up to WeChat Instant Games, which they are separate from the games that the first-party games that Tencent's publishing. They're actually HTML5 games, and those are also doing very well in the market right now. It's kind of on the rise. They're about, I want to say, there are not too many out there right now. We're actually exploring this a lot with Tencent as well, these H5 games.
Yeah, so basically, if you want to do business or date in China, use WeChat. It's the only way, right? So, thanks. Now, what would be the limitations of Chinese Android channels?
So one limitation, and I guess it's getting better now, but most Android app stores will not allow ads in the games. Now it's kind of improving a lot. So I don't want to say that if you asked me that maybe a year and a half, 2 years ago, I would say something different. But right now, Android is actually getting much better with their ad monetization. It's still a little weird in the China market. It's not quite as direct as it is in the West with Google Play, because I mean, the way, if you look at how the Android markets are set up, you have App Store A, you have App Store B. You're playing a game from App Store A, you may see an ad pop up for a game that's only available in App Store B. Obviously, App Store A does not want their players going to App Store B, so they all tend to be a little bit siloed up until recently, where you've gotten a few companies that have ad networks across multiple app stores, and we're seeing that there's definitely a trend increasing in this ad monetization, but it's still, I would say, about 80% of our revenue is still coming from IAP in the market.
Yeah, and another limitation is that all the Android stores in China takes more than 50% of your net revenue.
Yeah.
So that's kind of a crazy number, but that's the situation now. So the reason of this is that they dominated the mobile traffic. So most mobile game players on Android will use their app store. So that gives them the the leverage to charge that much. However, with the recent, there's a new Android store called TapTap, which they don't charge any commission, and their monetization is you can buy ads on the App Store for your own game. So it's kind of like a gamer community app, but you can also download game on their apps. So it's another new Android channel, and we see many indie developers benefited by the channel because all the game is ranked by score and user review instead of like you can pay to the other Android stores to get good feature. So all the game with creative gameplay or something new to the market has good score and review to get more exposure. So it's definitely something new to explore for all the games in China.
Yeah, I'd also add that most Android app stores, I don't think it's all of them, but most of them don't allow premium titles on their stores. There are a lot of restrictions from the government from that, and I believe it is all of them, but I don't quote me on that, because there's always something that pops up that maybe I don't know about. But that's always a big thing, and I know TapTap kind of ran into some problems too. And to get onto Android app stores, you have to go through the government review process, which we'll touch on later. But that's also a pretty big limitation because unlike iOS does theoretically require you to have an ISBN, which is basically your licensing number or banhao, and it's right now kind of in a, like, iOS is in a gray area. They've been in this gray area for a little while now where you can still launch your game in China, but they are starting to get more stringent on that restriction. And if you look at the iTunes backend, where when you're launching your game in China, there'll be a space to put your number in. Before, you can kind of just throw any number in. A lot of Western developers would do this so that they can get their iOS traffic, but it's not going to last for that long if it hasn't already become more stringent. And then on the Android side also, I mean, to go along with what I was saying before about the ad stuff, I mean, there are now loopholes right now that we're exploring in the market where you can launch games without an ISBN on these Android app stores, but you can't have any IAPs in the game. So that means that they can monetize through ads, but not through IAP. This is a very small sliver of the market, and we're still exploring this with some partners, but it's going to grow a little bit in the future. But right now, there's a little bit of a loophole for indies developers to kind of get in there and work with a Chinese publisher to get the game out there much faster than and much more of a geotest soft launch situation than there was before.
Okay, thanks for the comprehensive answer. Now let's move further towards the PC side, the premium side of things in China. And as you know, the buy-to-play market has always been quite niche in China. However, over the last 2 years, there has been quite a growth thanks to distributional platforms such as Steam or Tencent WeGame. And both platforms support local payment, but also regional pricing and Chinese language support, right? So this, alongside with the launch of huge titles such as Overwatch or PlayerUnknown Battlegrounds, has led to strong growth in the buy-to-play category in the Chinese market. And Steam has seen its user base double over the past few years. So my questions are, what are the contributing factors to the current rise of PC games in China? And do premium PC games actually work there, and what are the main actors on the PC publishing side, such as platforms, channels? If you could provide us with a overview of that. Yeah,
so I mean, just to kind of get things kicked off on the PC side, to go back where it started, it really started with Perfect World working very closely with Valve to get CSGO and Dota into China. This really kind of opened up the floodgates for Chinese players being exposed to Western content on Steam. And this was back when Chinese government couldn't really regulate it at all. So basically, if a Chinese player had the means to purchase games, like they had a foreign credit card or anything, they were able to download a lot of these Western games instead of getting the cracked builds that they would download elsewhere. And then Steam started wising up. where they started allowing for local payments, as Teddy was saying. So that's WeChat Pay, Alipay, Union Pay. They basically opened up these three main payment solutions to allow for for Chinese players to consume more games, more content on their platform. Fast forward about a year or so, they're starting to get a lot more traction in China now because the middle class is growing. There's a lot more appreciation for these premium games. Us personally, we're working only on the premium PC side, really. There are a lot of other players out there that have been doing free-to-play PC games in China for a while now. But premium is really kind of having this huge growth spurt in the past year and a half. We started about 2 years ago with our first PC experimentation there, and it's been going pretty well. I mean, the different genres, we've various types of games that we're publishing in China right now on both Steam and on Tencent's platform, as well as some of the other smaller guys that are coming up. And we're seeing a lot of similar numbers across the boards with these titles. I mean, no matter if they're an RPG, if they're 1v1 PvP game, it's very astonishing that we're seeing very similar numbers based on that. And in terms of pricing, yeah, so Teddy touched on it. They have the geodetect pricing right now on Steam. So usually it suggests that you do a price drop to about 50% of what it is in the West. What happens with Tencent is that when we're working with them, they actually want to see the price be even lower than that 50%, just so it remains more competitive with the Steam versions of the game and other versions that are out there. Let me think. You want to jump in with that? Because I'm thinking about other stuff.
I would like to see this from, let's say, a more historical progression side. Like I grew up in China, and like 20 years back, there was no like premium game at all because people don't have the money, and also there's like basically no copyright law at all, or that there are, but it doesn't work. So people can just buy a PC for work and gaming with an option of buying a game less than $1, like a game disc for PC. So that situation kept for a really long time, and for recent years we can see that people are getting richer. So we have more money to spend, and also people are more accepting of the idea of paying for electronic content, for example, music, movies, TV series, games. So that's also another main factor to contribute to the premium game growth in China. And also in 2015, the console ban was lifted, which like before that, for more than a decade, there's no legal console in China at all. So now PS4 and Xbox is officially in China, but due to the government approval process, the games on PS4 and Xbox China store are still limited. Many great games like GTA or Dark Souls, they will never be on China stores due to the either violence, the blood, or mature stuff. And however, we see that the market has a big potential because it's something new and just get started, so there are big potential for growth. And as one of the few console PC game publisher in China, we are very actively looking for new content from West to bring into China or other territories. Yeah.
Thank you. Let's focus now a little bit on the PC to mobile game adaptations, which has also been a trend that was successful. So in 2017, this was the success of PC to mobile game adaptations when the PC game is relaunched as a mobile game. And there were 6 games in 2016 in the top 10 iOS grossing charts that were classified as PC to mobile game adaptations. And in 2017, this increased to 7. So what do you see this year in terms of that trend, in terms of successful legacy titles and the launch of new PC to mobile game adaptations? Will this be the case this year?
Yeah, I guess it's this trend will continue, of course. If we take a look at the games that from PC to mobile, they're all free-to-play online games on PC. And they were successful for many years. but all of them are at its, say, it's the end of its lifespan. So the users are decreasing, and with the growth of the mobile users, the developer or the publisher, I think mostly just Tencent and Eles, they're exploring the opportunity to have more value from the already famous PC IP. So they made a mobile version, and it's actually not the weak point on PC is not the weak point on mobile, because the graphic on mobile is definitely more acceptable, and also the gameplay is although it's old, but on mobile it works as well. So that's why we see the trend will keep going. However, I think it does have some limitations. For example, if you are using, say, the PUBG IP for a match 3 game, that doesn't work, of course. And we also see some unsuccessful titles, using wrong gameplay or tweak the game too much for a free-to-play monetization. That might be something to worry about. Yeah.
Yeah, and just to add to that briefly is, I would encourage developers not to really look at those very few successful games that have done this, because I mean those are from some of the biggest developers in the world, with unlimited resources basically. Most of the games that have tried to do this, especially in China, or Western games that have tried to do it, they have not been successful bringing them to mobile and into the China market. A lot of the times we see this happen. We see it's like Michael's saying, there are too many mechanics that are a little messy for China. I mean for mobile. They're also the UI, the UX. That's all very different for whether you're mobile or a PC player. And I think that a lot of developers, they do try and think about this stuff when they're developing out the mobile version. But again, you're looking at two different, very, very different markets here. And the ones that have succeeded are usually free to play. The ones that I've seen that failed are usually the premium ones. And those are, it's a very, very tough market to do that for.
Okay. Let's move on towards esports, because that's very trendy, right? So basically in China, the esports was quite successful due to the ongoing of popular competitive titles such as League of Legends on PC or Honor of Kings on mobile, right? And should we expect this ongoing growth to also occur in the future? Will this be a boost from competitive PC and mobile titles? What's the situation in China on esports now?
Yeah, I guess I'm more a fan of the PC esports. Because I think PC esports is more, say, hardcore or technical oriented for the players to compete, and also due to the growth of live streaming, I see definitely a big market for esports. For either the pro athletes to to compete in a really serious game like the international of Dota 2 or other big events. And also live streaming provide a opportunity for them to continue their career even after they retire from the pro gaming, and they still can make a very good fortune from the live streaming. So I think that's definitely going a good direction.
I don't really have anything to add to that. That was...
Sure. Cool. So let's switch towards VR and AR, right? I remember like 2 years ago I was at GDC, and I think every single discussion with a Chinese person or company was about VR. They were crazy about it. However, these hopes have been a little bit tempered over the past year. We see the lack of investments in that field because they wanted to do it quite fast and they didn't really deliver yet. But on the other hand, on the augmented reality side, we had Pokemon Go in 2016, which just created a huge trend and success. And while Pokemon Go was not officially launched in China, and we can discuss the reasons for that, a number of Chinese companies did embrace elements from the game in their own titles. So with the release of Google AR Core and Apple's AR Kit, we expect this trend to continue, of course. So companies like NetEase have already committed to augmented reality games in their hardware, and we also expect more unified ecosystems across VR and AR this year. But how do you see the future of AR in China and also the VR? So we can talk about both that angle.
I can't speak too much to VR just because we don't really do any VR titles. We're not really looking into that market right now. But in China in general, there are lots of VR arcades that have been popping up, and that's been a huge trend for pushing the technology. On the AR side, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe it's still legal to have AR and location-based services in the games together in a game, just because China. I don't know. Have they changed that? I don't
So you mean illegal to have those?
yeah.
Oh, I
That's what we've
really
been-
don't sure about that.
Okay.
So for the general market for VR and AR, it's just still the market is still small but growing. For example, for VR, I think the trend was started from when Facebook invested a lot in Oculus. And after that, a lot of whether a developer or VCs, they seem to be crazy about this, and they think, oh, Facebook invested a lot, so there must be something we can take advantage of. So then a lot of VR developers pop up. Also, get a lot of funding. Some developer even don't have a good idea. They just get funding. And after a few years or 2 to 3 years, when we start to see VR game coming out, there are many VR games, but only a few successful ones, and others are not good. Don't have the good user experience to be able to generate great sales. So, and also for VR, it's a very money-consuming industry. You need to invest a lot of money in, and the user base is still not very big. So it's kind of then it goes a little bit down a bit. And for AR, I guess it's a similar situation, but with more potential, because the technology is easier to access for both developers and users. Although we haven't seen many, games based or full AR games yet, but I think there's definitely a bright future for AR.
Yeah, I mean, I'm pretty sure that it's not, you can't, like the government stops the game in the process if it does have LBS with AR. I'm almost positive about that, and that has a lot to do with basically the problems that Pokemon Go actually created in kind of society situations where you had mobs of people showing up at different places. Like, this is China's worst nightmare, is chaos. So having this type of mechanic is not something that was allowed. And I mean, for various reasons that it's not allowed, but also, I mean, those games that are out right now, they have the Google Maps as their backend, and they're using that data. And obviously, Google and all its services are banned in China. So that was a huge reason why Niantic couldn't get their Pokemon Go into China, along with these other restrictions from the government. But honestly, like the government, they're very fickle. They could turn on a switch and say something's legal one day and it's illegal the next day. So I mean, I think that the future is bright for AR. It's just in a little bit of a gray area in terms of legality with certain types of mechanics when you bring into that AR mechanic.
We'll discuss more on the governmental approval process a bit later on. But now let's still focus on the government. I'm not going to ask any bad questions, don't worry. But I'm curious.
No bad questions about the government. What are you talking about?
The idea is that I see that there's a lot of influence in Brazil, in Sweden, in Switzerland, in all around the world, Canada, for a lot of focus on the gaming industry of their own countries by promoting their companies, by trying to project them to other shows. So I was wondering in China whether you see a sort of growth from the governmental perspective of support towards the gaming industry. Are there any sectorial benefits, both domestically or internationally? Do you see that trend happening, or is it more complete capitalist, like each one is for its own teeth, and that's how it goes with the competition?
I would say there's not much of a community. I mean, I think that in China, the gaming industry is incredibly fragmented between different cities. I mean, China's massive, and they don't have the initiatives like Canada, Australia, Nordic, Brazil. They don't have any government forces. I mean, not in my experience. I don't know if you've spoken to anyone else, but there's the government, the trade shows that are there are massive. Like China Joy is a huge trade show. It's not so much about nationalistic pride. It's more really about focus on the different games that are coming out. And obviously, when Tencent or something like that, the government's very supportive of those companies bringing games into the global audience. But I would say that there's not a very kind of close community that you get necessarily like in conference ecosystems that you get in the West.
Yeah, I think for the countries mentioned, Canada, Australia, or Sweden, they're all developed countries, so they say they have less problem than the government in China has. So I think based on the entire country for the economy, the government is still trying to reduce the gap between rich people and poor people. So that's their main goal for the entire country. So for the game industry, it's a very big industry, and government take a lot of tax from, but still we see less support from the government. However, due to the recent years, we see that there are at least some rules for the games or the government approval. There used to be none. So we definitely think it's a good start, for the market to have regulations instead of lots of gray areas. So I think it's hard to say government supporting, but it's a good start.
It almost feels like they're kind of holding it back a bit because I mean they're like their fear is that too much content or the wrong type of content will get into the hands of Chinese players, and I mean, because of that, you have a lot more of this like gray area. You have a lot more restrictions than you would in other countries, and those are all driven by the government. I mean, you don't have the Australian government restricting players or content and stuff like that. They want to open it up as much as possible. With China, it's about reining it all back in and making sure that you can get everything under the microscope and making sure that all content is appropriate for the Chinese players that are going to be consuming it.
Okay, well, this leads me straight to the next question on the actual governmental approval process. Like, how long does that process go? Can you actually pass it? Because, we've seen regulations over the past decade in China, and as you mentioned, they could be ad hoc, they could happen at any time, there could be new regulations coming in. So apparently the Ministry of Culture 2 years ago enhanced an anti-addiction regulation, right? And this led to Tencent self-regulating its hit mobile game Honor of Kings by restricting the amount of time minors can actually play the game. And also in 2018 has already seen announcements from various regulatory bodies promising to tighten regulations and ensure all online game companies comply with those rules. So should we expect an increase of these regulations? And what type of regulations are existing, and how should a company bypass them, especially a Western one?
It's a loaded
question. Can you actually answer this? I know it's a difficult one.
I can start with the the standard for government approval. So if you, briefly, it's like you don't have blood or extreme violence or any mature or nudity in the game, and no
skeletons,
no threat to the reputation of the government, or no political or religious stuff. I think that's the basic, but there are still some very detailed stuff.
To add to that, I mean, to kind of also answer one of the questions you had, we've had experience, like, for a foreign game that's entering the China market, it's at minimum going to be a 3-month process. It's different for local Chinese games. It's usually a month is the minimum for those games. But for a Western title coming into the China market, at least 3 months. We've gotten games in 3 months. We've gotten games through the process in 6 months. It really depends on the content. As Michael was saying, he listed a bunch of things. One of the things that we got smacked for was skeletons. We published a game called Hand of Fate in China. And if anyone's played the game, one of the 4 races is skeletons. Thereby, about 25% of the content is skeleton content. 3D art, 2D art, it was all over the place. It took us about 6 weeks to scrub it all out and replace skeletons with wood golems. We did a lot of stuff with, we had a lot of artistic creativity with some of the stuff we changed on the 2D art side. But basically, it really depends on the content that you're getting through. A lot of casual, easy games to get through that are very innocent will get through in 3 months. But what I always tell developers is when you're looking at China, budget for about 5 months. I think it's a very safe cushion, and usually you can get the game through in that process in that time.
So can a Western company bypass this process alone without support from other Chinese companies?
If they can, it would be the first time I'd hear of it. You really need a local entity. I mean, because I say that because there are developers that have been trying to set up their own entities within China so that they can get past the first step, which is basically proving that you're a Chinese company and you have a local office presence. I would say that your best bet is to work with a publisher going through the process. There are also companies that kind of like not really publishers, but really just the guys that will try and get the game license for you. I mean, that's the only service that they'll do. They won't help with publishing or anything, but if you're in a desperate situation, that is another alternative to go with. But for the most part, you do need to go through a Chinese publisher, and you want to in the end, because I mean, they'll do much more than just get the game through the review process. They'll also support it in terms of live ops, in terms of marketing, in terms of production, like content changes and stuff like that, and will really guide you and handhold you throughout the whole process. It is a headache, though. It requires a ton of time. It requires, I think it's about like 20 or 30K in cost to get it through the review process. And yeah, I mean, it's a patience thing too. So I mean, working with a local partner is definitely the way to go. And if you don't want to work with a local partner, I would say good luck. It's a hard process to kind of navigate yourself.
Yeah, and for I think one thing I'd like to add on is, even for the local publishers, they still go through another, say, physical publisher, like the publisher with books or DVDs. So those are the publisher with the license to apply for the government approval. And they have the government relations. So they've been doing the approval for years with all the books and DVDs. So they know the process, they know the actual guy in the government, which actually helps you to accelerate the process. So I definitely agree with Matt to go with a Chinese publisher if you are serious about Chinese market.
Okay. Well, then let's briefly discuss what the regular process for a game to be published in China works and looks like. Like, what are the initial steps? How does the process unfold? What should a Western developer or a Brazilian developer be made aware in terms of strategy and steps when working with a publisher in China?
Like government approval, whole process, or do you want to take that one?
Yeah, I guess for a start, for the Western developers can talk to Chinese publishers first to see if their title are suitable for the market. For example, if you talk with like 20 publishers in China and nobody is interested in the game, maybe the game itself doesn't suit the market that well. So that's a good start. And if you find interesting parties, Chinese publishers will help you publish the game in China, and then you're looking at localization at first, and then go through the government approval. While going through that process, I guess in the meantime, you can integrate all the SDKs required. And if it's PC console game, you can do QA or FQA for the PS4, Xbox, etc. And then when you get the license from the government, you can start with marketing preparation towards launch. Yeah, that's the basic process to publish a game in China.
I mean, and it's kind of like what I said before. It's for at least us, we do a phased launch where, I mean, we don't blitzkrieg 200 app stores at the same time. It's really phased out. After the government approval process happens, it's very much tied into our marketing plan when we work with these individual stores. And the way we work with these individual app stores is very specific. So we'll work with one app store where we'll get a splash screen feature for that particular app store, so that when players are using that app store, one of our games pops up as soon as they open the app. We've experimented with various types of pre-registrations with app stores. Really, there's a different strategy that you want to use with each of these big Android app stores, and that actually, in that time that you're doing the government review process, that's what you're really preparing for, is the different SDKs, as Michael said, and also the different marketing strategies for each of these channels.
Okay, thanks. And now let's focus specifically on the actual contracts and negotiations with publishers from a Western developer's perspective. Like, and I know this varies, but I'm sure there are some sort of limitations. So what would you advise in terms of what is the cut on profit taken by Chinese publishers? How much leeway for negotiation exists when you have discussions, you or generally speaking other companies? Is there a standard procedure for it, or is it all based on the subjective view of each one?
I would say that we typically run by a 50-50 rev share contract, but again, that's not set in stone. We work with teams of all sizes and all different requirements, so this is something that we've modified over time, and that's really 50-50 in the China market. On the global side, we'll usually take less of a rev share just because the developer is usually taking a lot more, putting a lot more burden on themselves for the global market, so we'll take far less rev share on the global side. But it really depends on the title for us. I mean, every game is different that we look at, and every partnership has been different. So it's hard to say a standard thing, but you should look for a fair. There's no reason why a Chinese company should be ripping you off with rev share. I mean, especially if you have other Chinese partners that are interested, someone will make you an offer that's a little bit more reasonable than like a 20-80 split or something like that.
Yeah, and I think for the developers, it's definitely great for them to have some MG in front. Yeah. So that's maybe a small amount of MG, but it helps with the burden of the development, and also shows the sincerity of a publisher trying to really help your game grow in China. And for PC and console side, the revenue share can be more in favor towards the developer. Like what we do is standard revenue share is 60 from net revenue to the developer to 70. So definitely more favorable to the developers. Yeah.
Yeah, I'd agree. When I was saying 50-50, that's more on the mobile side. I would agree with the PC side. We definitely have a bigger rev share towards the developer. But there's one thing I wanted to add to that. I actually, with MGs, we personally don't love to throw that much money out in front, but what we'll do is we'll have a modified MG where we'll basically say, hey, look, we'll give you this much, we'll promise you 1 million in revenue, and we'll basically do rev share split up until like a 6-month or 1 year point. And if we haven't met that revenue benchmark by that time, then we'll pay the rest out to the developer. And that basically allows us to make money while the game is being launched in those first year or 6 months. And it's fair to it also still shows the good faith of the developer that we're still willing to put our money where our mouth is. And if the game isn't working out, and if we're not pushing in the right way, you still have that in the contract that, hey, I'm still getting this amount by X date in the future.
Thank you very much. I have a few more questions, but I think we should turn our attention towards the audience and take some open floor questions, if you have some. If you can introduce yourself and company.
Audience. I think you might answer that, but I'm going to ask anyway. Is it true that games based on geolocalization and VR are forbidden in China, and why?
Yeah, I think the it's kind of what I was saying about the geolocation before. I think it causes a little bit too much chaos right now in China for them to regulate it. It's a regulation thing. And again, I'm not going to touch the VR side, but I believe the AR mechanic with geolocation is right now banned in China. If that lifts, it would be great, but right now that's the impression that I'm getting, and my sources have told me that.
Yeah, and VR games as well, or no?
VR is fine. I mean, VR is perfectly. Well, we haven't done any, but I don't know.
Yeah, I think VR is like legal in China. You can do VR games, but the market I think it's even smaller compared to the rest of the world.
Yeah.
What kind of genres are more popular in China that Brazilian might invest?
Genres.
I
think it's genders. Let's see. Genres, I mean, we kind of touched on it. The RPG genre is definitely really popular, but when we're looking at games, we're not looking at the same thing that's already out on the App Store. We're looking for the different mechanics. So if you look at some of the games we've launched recently, like Rodeo Stampede is not an RPG whatsoever, and that's been doing very well for us in the China market. So we're actually actively trying to find those games that aren't so much of what we're seeing from Chinese developers in the China market. And obviously it creates a more scrutinizing look at some of these titles, but we're looking for the ones that are different from the RPGs and the MMOs of the world, because there are hundreds of those in China. And honestly, a Chinese developer will do it better than you, no matter what, for China market. it's there. It's in their DNA right now to do these games. So, yeah.
Yeah, and the last question I got here is more or less, as you said, does the distance between Brazil and China and the language can be like problems for develop games for Chinese market?
By language, do you mean like communication between developers and publishers, or for the localization?
It didn't specify here, but I think it might be the language between developers and companies, and of course the translation to Chinese maybe.
I would say it's kind of what Michael was saying before. I mean, if you're going in the market and no one's really interested in the title, then maybe not push it in China. But you should always be developing for your own market or the market that you understand best, rather than trying to develop for another market. And I've seen a lot of developers kind of go crazy trying to develop for China. Yes, there's stuff you can keep in mind when you're thinking about China, like maybe not be as gory as you want it to be, less blood, less like geopolitical stuff. We did change out a whole geopolitical thing in one of the games that we did on PC because the government review was going to smack that. And so I would say that develop for your country first, then look over to China. In terms of communication stuff, you shouldn't really have a problem communicating with a Chinese publisher, because you'll have account managers that speak both Chinese and English. Most of the project managers will be able to read and write English. Maybe they're not as comfortable speaking it, but there's always a liaison or someone to bridge that gap for you, so that you don't have to worry about that too much.
Yeah, and I think especially for those small indie developers, sometimes the publisher will require a lot of changes in terms of gameplay or adding a new like VIP system for China. Sometimes for small developers, they really need to think clearly about this, whether they want to put like 6 months to just develop something, very dedicated for China. Maybe just launch the game as itself will do better.
I completely agree with that. I think it's a little unfair when some publishers put on the shoulders of developers. I mean, for us, we do everything in-house when we're doing changes, but I mean, like Michael's saying, like if you add a VIP system, that's also taking away dev work from whatever features you want to add for the Western side. Screw the China side. I mean, but you have your own dev roadmap that you want to complete on your own time, and if then the Chinese publisher burdens you with all these changes, you really have to step back and say, well, how much is this worth it? Like, what are the numbers that they're predicting if I make these changes? What's it mean for me and my team? Like, how is that going to change? Something like that.
Unfortunately, our time's up. So thank you very much for your time here. Quem não teve as perguntas respondidas, quiser conversar com eles, eles vão estar aqui no Big Festival, é só chegar e conversar. Obrigado pela presença de todos. Só peço que se retirem da sala para a gente poder preparar para o próximo painel. Obrigadão.